Yellowstone's real hazards: supereruptions, hydrothermal explosions, earthquakes, and lava flows. This is from the recent Yellowstone Volcano Observatory Caldera Chronicles, the latest update by USGS. As we know, the Yellowstone Caldera Chronicles is a weekly column. It's written by scientists and collaborators of Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. This observatory was just recently actually established in 2001 after a 2000 documentary by the BBC showing the catastrophe that a supereruption could cause. The US government was so moved by that they established the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory the year after in 2001. So it's basically a young observatory, not even 20 years old, and they have a lot of work to do because they have the world's most geysers. 60% of the world's geysers are found at Yellowstone, and it has over 10,000 hydrothermal spots. And as we know, they cannot have field trips all year long. It's basically from May until the first snows. And even in May, now that they started going out, they still have 4 feet of snow they have to dig under in order to place the monitoring equipment. And as you can understand, it's not very easy. This week's contribution is from Wendy Stovall, volcanologist with the USGS and deputy scientist in charge of Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. At HVO, they say, we receive a lot of questions related to Yellowstone's supereruption, what ifs and whens, even though that is the least possible scenario for future volcanic activity. News articles, websites, and videos often exaggerate the rarest events while ignoring hazards that may actually happen during a person's life. So right here, right now, we're going to flip this around and discuss Yellowstone's geologic hazard scenarios in order from most to least likely. One is hydrothermal explosions. They are the most likely of Yellowstone's volcano hazards with little to no warning. Thermal features can erupt as rock-hurtling geysers that excavate shallow craters. Smaller explosions occur more often and can impact an area tens of feet in diameter, whereas less frequent, larger eruptions could send hot water and rocks a few thousand feet. On average, one hydrothermal explosion occurs every 2 years at Yellowstone. Because these events are typically small and can occur any time, including when few visitors are present, the likelihood of harm to any individual is reduced. A famous example is the 1989 explosion of Pork Chop Geyser in the Norris Geyser Basin. Did you know hot springs have injured and killed more people in Yellowstone than encounters with wildlife? Boardwalks and trails are there to protect visitors. And off-boardwalk hiking is very dangerous. Scalding water underlies most of the thin, breakable crust around the hot spots. Now, I just want to remind you that when we look at Yellowstone, which sits in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, the actual caldera is underneath the Yellowstone Lake. The Yellowstone Lake is on top part of the caldera. That is, the roof of the magma chamber lies just below the water of the lake, and it's only 3 miles down. So when you're standing there, this hot magma chamber, the top of it, the roof of it is exactly 3 miles under your feet. Now, the second one is damage from large earthquakes in the magnitude of 7 range. There was such a magnitude 7.3 in 1959. And we're still feeling the aftershocks of that quake even today in Yellowstone, 60 years later, they say. So the magnitude 7 range large earthquakes ranks in the second most likely Yellowstone hazard. As discussed last week, there are many faults within the Yellowstone Plateau. A couple thousand earthquakes occur every year. But 99% of those are magnitude 2 or below and are undetectable by the humans. Earthquakes within the caldera max out around magnitude 6, owing to the nature of the faults and the rocks. But outside the caldera, regular faults associated with basin and range extension are capable of producing large earthquakes, like the magnitude 7.3 that took place in 1959 at Hebgen Lake. Such large earthquakes can occur once or twice per century, but like all other geologic hazards, they do not operate on a schedule. So once or twice per century, we may be coming in for another large earthquake. Now, number 3, it's not until third place that magma is the culprit for creating a hazard, the lava flows. Almost all of the past few dozen or so magma-generated Yellowstone eruptions were lava flows, and they were interspersed with a few moderate volcanic ash eruptions. The individual rhyolite lava flows are some of the most massive on Earth. They reach 19 miles from their source vents and can have thicknesses greater than 1,300 feet. These are mountains. Or the height of the Empire State Building. Again, these are as high as mountains. The eruptions occurred as groups, clustered in time, separated by non-eruptive periods. Yellowstone's most recent volcanic eruption was the lava flow that formed the Pitchstone Plateau 70,000 years ago. Since the last supereruption, quote-unquote, rhyolite lava has filled in much of the Yellowstone caldera. The total flow volume is around 600 cubic kilometers, or 140 cubic miles, which would fill the Dallas Cowboys AT&T Stadium 200,000 times. If future volcanic activity at Yellowstone led to an eruption, it would probably result in a lava flow, or less likely, moderate ash fall. However, we're currently in the eruption hiatus, and history tells us these types of eruptions are clustered events. Plus, current monitoring data shows that volcanic activity at Yellowstone is not increasing. And number 4, all of the possible volcano hazard scenarios for Yellowstone, by far the least likely includes another major explosive caldera forming eruption. This is certainly the worst case scenario for Yellowstone, but the chances of it happening in our lifetime are literally 1 in a million. At some point in the future, a supereruption might occur somewhere else on Earth, but we may be waiting tens of thousands of years before another such event worldwide takes place, and it's possible that a supereruption may never happen again at Yellowstone, so we'll leave it at that. At Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, YVO, we hear from people who are literally losing sleep with worry over a possible supereruption, but this limited perspective misses the big picture of Yellowstone hazards. The one event that most people are aware of, a massive explosion, is also the least likely to occur, by far. Even lava flows or moderate ash eruptions are unlikely. On the scale of human lives, the most likely hazard are small hydrothermal explosions like the September 2018 eruption of Ear Spring Geyser, or a strong earthquake like the 7.3 magnitude that took place in 1959 at Hebgen Lake. The spectrum of Yellowstone activity is much more complex than just rare catastrophic eruptions. Now, when you look at the graphic representation of the frequency of hazardous events that occurred at Yellowstone, the more frequent, of course, are the small hydrothermal explosions. There are several to many per century. Next to that, which is less frequent, are strong earthquakes, 1 to several per century, the strong earthquakes. And less frequent are the lava flows, which are over 100 per million years. And the least frequent is caldera forming eruptions, 1 or 2 per million years. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.